Okay, so thanks. Sorry, I'll reintroduce myself, Megan Mason from the Center for Global Engagement. Thank you for watching. And we have a couple of other folks who are sort of experts with us today. One of those is a student who studied in France last year, Carter. Carter, are you able to unmute yourself and say hi to everybody?
Hi. I feel like a lot of people on this call know me. I'm Carter. I'm a senior this year. And yes, I was in Paris for 2.5 months out of 4 last spring with Coupa was the program I was a part of.
Thanks. What remind me what track of the major you are?
So I'm track 2, French and Spanish, uh, which made things really interesting. So like I particularly chose Coupa because of their extensive partnerships with other with universities around the city, and my ability to get into Spanish courses there because I needed to fulfill a credit of Spanish, uh, and uh, that's very interesting. I will get to that. However, my other stuff was all my classes were taught 100% in French. Even the courses I took that were in-house with Coupa. I took an art history course and in a as well as a course on France's colonial history in Africa. And even those courses, they don't water anything down for the in-house experience. In fact, I feel like they may even make it more difficult because they're, I guess, trying harder. Uh, I guess I can now talk a little bit about life at the Sorbonne, which was the Parisian university that I was a part of. So you have at the Sorbonne, and I think of a lot of other universities, you have two different course structures. You have cours magistral, that's the big lecture. So you'll be in a pretty sizable lecture hall, think Higley Auditorium, in which a professor will spend the next hour. I don't want to say aimlessly lecturing. However, it is they just sort of recite their lesson without much like engagement from the audience. However, then there's also TD, which is travaux dirigés. That's There's a little more person to context. It'll be not too far from a Kenyon course, and that there'll be 20-ish people in the room, in which it'll be most likely a whole different professor teaching something that is like tangentially related to what the Cormadi style lecture was on for the week. However, it'll have a different twist to it, whether it be some sort of like supplementary material, or it'll be just more of like a deeper dive into the content. Like I took a history course on. It was talking about like the period in between the two world wars in Europe was what it was covering, and in that section, the TD was very much sort of like a finer detailed look at what was covered in the big lecture. However, the Spanish class, it was a whole different deal. Like in the Spanish course, the big lecture was talking about like various Spanish authors, uh, talking about like what movement of literature they were a part of, giving you some certain like motifs and like a brief bio, and that would be the lecture for the day. And like the professor would be like, look on Moodle. Yes, they did use Moodle there. Look on Moodle. You can find it. You can find examples on there, and just sort of would sort of gloss over it. Whereas in the TD section, it would be these like super meticulous, like cause my head to explode meticulous lessons on how to analyze a text. And that was to learn my third language through the lens of my second language was, uh, especially from the instructor I had, was an adventure. All right, I'll stop talking now.
Thanks, Carter. Do the faculty who are here want to introduce yourselves? Because I realize, I guess, not all of the students may know who all of you are, and you're all also resources for our students. So do you want to introduce yourselves as well, please?
I see myself at the top of the screen, so I guess I'll go ahead and start. My name is Mort Guiney, and I see that several of the students from Intro French are here today. Thank you very much for coming. I've been teaching French at Kenyon for quite a while, and so I've sent many students on study abroad programs and talked to them after they came back, whether they were French majors or not French majors, because of course, both categories of students study in French-speaking countries, not just France like Carter did, but in other French-speaking countries. Who wants to go next?
Do we need to call on people?
Maybe.
For Catherine.
Setting up my headphones here. I am Mary Catherine Malone. I teach French, and I'm also the language program coordinator, so I work with the apprentice teachers. I'm not sure what else to say here. One of the things that I work on is advanced language acquisition and the steps that we can take to get there. And we know that study abroad, while not the end all be all, like you don't have to have studied abroad to get you there. We do know that it is a significant contribution for a number of reasons. So we really do strongly encourage you to participate in a program if that is at all possible for you.
Thank you, Pierre. My name is Ian Curtis. I'm currently teaching French 321. I see Louis from that class, and 323, Approaches to French Literature. Emma is representing that class. Thank you both for coming. I'm a professional study abroader. I studied abroad when I was a Kenyon student. Through the Sweetbriar program, which unfortunately is not an option any longer, but there are other good options. I did a master's in France at Paris 8, and I've also been a study abroad student, an exchange student at Sciences Po Paris and at the ENS. So I have some experiences with those things, and if you ever want to talk about any of my experiences in France or are looking for guidance with anything related to study abroad, I am happy to tell you whatever I can.
Bonjour, my name is Pierre Deron. Come originally from France, so I could say, I mean, not a professional study abroader, but I mean, kind of also. So when I was in France, I studied in France for, I got my master's degree in France, first a master's degree in history, and then I changed and got another one in literature in the US. I was studying abroad in the US. But I also studied abroad in Canada, so I also know the Canadian system. And my specialty is mostly Francophone literature and cultures. So I'm the one coming from France originally, but I'm trying to introduce and show you all the possibilities. Or I'd like to show you the possibilities you have to study abroad outside of France, because I think there are so many great programs. Many students went to these programs, had great experience too. So this is really, I can talk about that, obviously. And I think, Carter, it was a while since I studied in France, but it didn't change much, okay? It's roughly, it's the same.
Thank you. I feel like that's a good segue for me to share this lovely departmental link that you all have put together that lists some recommended programs throughout the Francophone world. So if you have chat enabled, you can see this. If not, I think if you just do a Google search for Kenyon MLL OCS, it's probably not the first link, but it'll be like the second link that you'll find. So it unfortunately does look like the Sweetbriar program is still on there. So as you heard, that program was very recently discontinued, but the other programs that are there are solid options for you to consider in France and in the Francophone world as a whole. So we don't have necessarily students who have studied on all of those programs last year, but we do recommend some of those programs. Oh, thank you, Pierre. That's lovely. So wanted to give you a sort of a brief, very brief explanation about how off-campus study works as far as applying and logistics. I know a lot of you are first years, so this may not be something you're too worried about yet. We just want to make sure you have it out there. So when you do off-campus study at Kenyon, you apply for Kenyon approval first, and then you apply directly to your program for approval. So there's 2 steps to that process. The Kenyon approval, it's one deadline. That deadline is typically in February every year. And this year, applications have to be submitted by February 15th. In order to apply, someone in the CGE has to open your application for you. So you need to meet with someone in the CGE virtually these days over Google Meet no later than February 1st in order to open up that application for next year. So that's for fall or spring. We don't have the same sort of approval process if you're looking for summer programs because summer programs are a lot less popular for Kenyon. But if you are looking at summer programs, I think we can still offer some suggestions. A lot of students also do summer programs that are in the US, like the Middlebury summer programs are kind of a popular option for a lot of MLL students. So after you apply for Kenyon approval, then you apply directly to your program for approval. And so that is that sort of second step of the process. And any time in between now and the time that you are there and come back, the CGE is a resource for you. And so we are happy to meet with you and talk about options as much or as little as you need, basically whenever you need that. So we do a lot of one-on-one advising, and sometimes we meet with students maybe just once or twice. They kind of have an idea of what they want to do and we help narrow it down. Sometimes we meet with students a lot more than that as they're kind of trying to consider options. So as much as you need or as little as you need, just a minimum of that one time to open the application before February 1st if you're applying as a sophomore to study off campus next year as a junior. And that's the main part about the application. I also want to mention financial aid because that's really important. So Kenyon Financial Aid does travel with you for any semester programs or for a full year program as part of that Kenyon approval process. We don't have any financial aid that's available for summer programs. It would only be for those semester length, but it does travel with you. So if you have questions about how that would look for you on a specific program or what that means, we can kind of sit down and do an individual budget sheet with you. My colleague, Sam Turner, is the best person to help out with that. But if you have questions about finances, we're happy to answer them. And we find that most students who do take the time to ask are able to afford off-campus study. So it is something that Kenyon prioritizes. That's the 2 main things that I really wanted to highlight. Professor Guiney, do you have anything else that you'd like to make sure that we mention to students who are considering OCS at this point?
Actually, yes, I can talk a little bit later on about maybe how off-campus study relates to the Kenyon curriculum and to our departmental curriculum. But before I do that, Megan, actually, I had a question for you. The pre-approved programs in Francophone countries do they, is there a range of language proficiency in French that is required for these programs? Are some of them tougher in terms of the required language proficiency and others more lenient?
Yes, that's a great question. Yes, they do range. The Syracuse program has no language requirement whatsoever, so that one would be kind of the option if someone's maybe just beginning French this year and thinking about going next year. That would probably be a good option for them to consider. The intermediate would be the Minnesota MSID, Ahmed East in Morocco, and potentially Coupa and Sweetbriar are kind of the next level of intermediate, right? So Carter, how much French did you take before you went? You took more, right?
I took the semester right before I took 321 and 324. They want to be at the 321-ish level. So like I'd say like a step above intermediate because they do 100% in French. Like you sign a language contract at the door. I mean, like when you go to the Sorbonne and like the other universities, they're not going to give you any special treatment. Everything will be 100% in French, and they want to make sure that you'll be able to survive in that setting. However, like that being said, they also understand that you are still learning, and they have a lot of good language resources. They have like 2 tutors at any given point that you could schedule office hours with to work on stuff. And they do like there's in the 2-week orientation, a lot of that involves like some like language coaching.
Yeah, so it's kind of I would call that like intermediate plus. Like ideally, it's best if you have 5 semesters. If you're going for the full year, they might consider letting you in with 4 semesters if you're a really strong student, but it wouldn't be kind of a guarantee. And then the top is going to be Middlebury. They usually want to see 323 or higher.
I remember the like Middlebury person like telling me that. She's like, yeah, you can take 321, but you better also take another class because we don't like that one.
Yeah. Yeah, they want to see that you've taken a content course is what they would call it. So 323 is usually what students here take, but they would call it right a content course. So that's sort of the range, if you will. Occasionally we had a student, Mia Tapper did the IES Not program, which isn't on this list. But that one I think is also 2 years, but maybe with a preferable for 2.5, if you can do it. So that's sort of what they're typically looking for. What I would say is the more French that you can take before you go, the more options you'll have for what you can take while you're there. So if you're still focusing on learning the language, then you're going to be mostly focused on those language learning classes while you're there. If you are a little more advanced, you might be able to kind of expand those options and do something like what Carter did and take a different subject class taught in French. So having that higher proficiency just expands the options of what you can do and your facility to take those classes.
Thank you, Megan. And just to build on that, the question of language proficiency, if you take a class like with Coupa or Middlebury that is clearly what Megan just called a content class, it might be a literature class, a history class, art history, political science, whatever subject matters are available to you in this particular program, if it's taught in French, then we assume that it would be the equivalent of at least a 300 level course here at Kenyon. And those are the courses that count toward the French major, if that's something that some of you are considering. Yes, Carter.
I actually, I have I guess, a story to tell about that.
Oh, okay,
So
good.
the course I took, it was an in-house course with Coupa. It was their class on Francophone Africa and France's colonial history. Which was taught 100% in French. You know, there was not a word of English used throughout the entire curriculum. However, it was like classified as a history class, and that's what it showed on my transcript. And according to the registrar, I actually had to like go to the registrar, like I had to go through some hoops so that way it would count towards my major. And like once I got it done, they were perfectly okay with it. But yes, that it does. Even if it doesn't say French, it is still French.
Absolutely.
And I would add something also that's interesting, Carter. So I actually studied abroad when I was a student at Kenyon, and I ended up with too many courses for my major and not enough for my distribution requirements. And the registrar was actually very flexible in allowing me to count some of my, I forget if it was the art history courses I took in Paris or something else, but actually counting those towards social sciences instead of language. So my experience, this was a while ago, but was that the registrar was pretty flexible with being able to make, you know, your study abroad work for your different requirements at the college.
And there's another interesting thing that about courses abroad, and I guess any kind of off-campus course, and Megan, correct me if I'm wrong, but it will not necessarily, in fact, it will rarely translate as 0.5 units per course, right? If you take a course at Kenyon, if it's a normal course, it's going to be 1/2 a unit. But other schools with different number of contact hours, different for various reasons, it might count as 0.38 units or something like that. But if it's more than if it's more than a quarter unit, if it's well above a quarter unit, as far as the Modern Languages Department is concerned, it counts as a course. So you might see, for example, that the minor requires 2 units or 2.5 units. The major requires 4 units or 5 units of upper level courses. What we're really saying is that we require 8 classes or 10 classes. And the majority of the classes, if they are somewhere in the ballpark of 1/2 a unit, will count as one of those classes, even if it doesn't all add up to 8 or 10 or whatever the required number is. But of course, the registrar will only add up the units that you actually received while you study off campus. So you better be sure that you're on track for your total of what is it, 16?
16. Yep.
16 units overall that you need in order to graduate. Because if it's halfway through the spring of your senior year and you only have 15.5 units, you have a problem.
It's if you have accumulated any extras along the way, you might not need to worry too much about that. But if you haven't, or if you've mulliganed something, that slight difference is usually made up by like a physical activity class or a music lesson really well. So there are a lot of ways to kind of deal with that aren't too onerous to do.
It's very easy. And also the registrar will audit your courses periodically, so that by the time you do become a senior, you will have received in writing an exact list of just how many units you need in order to graduate. You still need in order to graduate. And if you haven't done your fine arts distribution or your quantitative reasoning requirement or something like that, that will also be in the audit that you receive. But it is important to know before you go off campus that the number of courses that you take will not necessarily add up to the number of units that you would receive if you were taking courses on campus. Right.
Just a quick question to Carter. It's related to the credits because I mean, you noticed, and Professor Curtis can comment on that as well. The grading system is very different in France. Could you comment on that? How the credits and grades are transferred, because that could be an issue for some students. I mean, especially at the beginning, you might be very surprised by your grades. So could you comment on that, Carter, please?
Yes. So Coupa they sort of functioned as a middleman. One thing that they had to emphasize to us and our faculties and our professors at our various universities is that Coupa themselves, they are the ones who certify the credits and report the grades. Like, they are the middleman between Kenyon and these French institutions. I mean, so French universities base everything out of 20. And the way Coupa did it is that anything below an 8 is you flunked it, we're not giving you credit. A 12, 13, 14 was like B minus, B plus, and then 15 was A minus. Up until 17, everything further was considered an A plus, is how Coupa did it. And I think that was more to bridge how the professors were thinking versus how the registrar would be thinking. So it showed up as like the standard American letter grade on my transcript from Coupa. And also, they were the ones who set the rules for contact hours and credits, where their rules were that if you had, I think it was two contact hours a week, it would work, and they would cross-reference it with Kenyon's rules to make sure that was a thing, because Coupa standards was also what Kenyon's would be in that 4 standard length classes is a full load. And that I found it pretty seamless to transfer grades and credits. But I was, I guess, lucky in that regard.
Yeah, a lot of places a typical course load is 5, and so that's why the math comes back a little bit funky sometimes, because you're trying to divide 5 into 4, but then a regular load is not quite, it's just a little short of what's normal. So the math seems complicated, but it's actually as long as you understand that it's focus on the courses, it's not too bad. The other thing is the registrar's office looks at everybody's tentative course list before they go. So if you're not sure that you're doing the right thing, you have plenty of time to fix it.
Mine changed, I think, 4 times before I actually signed up for anything.
And then did you have to email after you got there with more changes?
Yep.
Yeah. So I think the key to recognize is just flexibility is a really important attribute to have in the process leading up to going, and actually after you get there as well. And just knowing that if it doesn't seem like it's perfect at first, you can work on it and improve it. And that people here at Kenyon are willing to help you make that happen.
Megan, could you, I'm sorry, please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I was just, asking you, it's a rhetorical question, I guess, but could you talk about the lodging also, where the students stay and how it works? Because I know it might be different, and the experience also it's a key part of the experience abroad.
Sure. Probably the most popular housing option for language programs, including most of these, would be host family options. And so host families are a pretty popular option for students. Host families, in some cases, it may not be an option. That may just be the kind of standard program housing. So host families can range. What a family means might be anything from a large family to just one older retired empty nest person. So the family definition can definitely vary by location and by place, but it's going to be someone who you live with, who wants to have some sort of exchange with you, who you can practice your French with, who typically will be involved in like providing breakfast or dinners at least sometimes. So you'll have some sort of home cooked meal from time to time, and just an opportunity for you to kind of understand the cultural aspects of what home life are like in the place where you're living, and to make some connections there. So those are definitely one of the more popular options. Some of the programs will offer apartments, and so apartments might be with other students on the program, or potentially could be with local students, although that option is fairly rare. I think Middlebury has a couple of foyer options, which are kind of like apartments with students, but subsidized and for only other students. So there are a couple other options, but the host family tends to be the most popular. Carter, do you want to talk about your experience at all?
Yes. So I was with a host family, and I would say I was on sort of that other extreme of that. Like, I was very much part of a fully functioning family. That being said, they were like sort of semi-empty nesters in that like their kids were like, their youngest was my age, and then they sort of were a couple years above from there. However, they would pop in from time to time. Like, one of them was there for the first month that I was there, whereas another, she was coming home for spring break as I was having to leave as coronavirus was escalating. Little did she know that she'd be there on lockdown. But that being said, it was very much a full family structure. They both had, I would say, probably 9 to 5 jobs. She was a statistician for the Department of the Interior. And whereas like one of my friends, he was like, yeah, it's just me and my host mom. And she was, retired and just, wanting to let someone else have an extra room in her apartment. And I was, I guess, lucky in that both my host parents were fluent in English. My host father's mother was an English teacher for her entire life. And so I got sort of lucky in that. So like, if there was sort of a moment in which we needed to level a little more directly, we could switch to English if there was something that needed to be communicated. That being said, like, I was their 8th host student. They were very much a professional host family in that aspect, going back to like years and years. And it did take a little adjustment to get used to that family dynamic, just because at first they were complete strangers, and it probably took a couple weeks for me to get comfortable living in someone else's apartment. And sometimes they were like, they'd be home by like 7 each night, and we'd have dinner around like 8:30. And like Coupa had like, set rules about like, they are to provide you 5 breakfasts and 5 dinners. That being said, because they were such pros at it, they more or less didn't care. And, if I were around for one of the meals that it didn't say on my sheet that I was allotted by Coupa, they just, didn't hesitate. And I just sort of, join in.
Yeah, I think each host family has such a different dynamic, and getting used to that can be challenging at the beginning, but once you do, kind of get used to them, you usually get sort of groove and kind of understand which of those rules like they're really particular about and which ones there's a little more like wiggle room or things. I think a lot of the challenges that people have with host families, the program is a really good resource for you if you are not sure like what to do about something, or you're not sure why you might be having a conflict. They're usually a really good resource for that. Not that everyone has a conflict, but sometimes they do come up because you're a guest in someone's home. And so it's a really good learning opportunity. And sometimes a learning opportunity comes with things that are challenging too. So that's definitely, it's definitely been a popular option just because it does give you the chance to continue using your language skills outside of the classroom and make sure that you're working on those as well. So I think that's something that's important to think about, what you would want out of a housing experience, and to be looking at that as you're looking at programs.
If it were me, that's the option that I would choose for the language practice, for the cultural experience. And over the years, many Kenyan students have really bonded with their host families. It doesn't happen in 100% of the cases by any means, but when it does happen, it can be a really special thing to really, in a sense, sort of be adopted almost by another family from another country, which is a great experience when it happens.
Carter, did you have a chance to get involved in anything outside of classes, like hobbies or?
So yes. So one of the staples of study abroad is being able to travel. So I did a couple of day trips to Lens, which is where champagne comes from. It's where Veuve Clicquot, if you're familiar with that brand of champagne, that's where they're headquartered. I also went up to Normandy, the town of Deauville, which is a really pleasant beach town, and also Mont Saint-Michel. And then I had a bunch of other trips that were lined up that got canceled. The other thing is I am a runner because it helps me keep my head on straight. And I was signed up for the Paris Half Marathon, also got canceled on the very last, at the very last minute. It was like the day before, and they said the coronavirus is starting to escalate. We can't do this today. So like I spent the 2 months training, and like I had a group of running buddies in the adjacent park. And also Coupa does, they had a lot of other windows for social engagement. Like they allot everyone X amount of concert tickets per semester, and you can also like wheel and deal with the other students on when to go to those. And they hosted various other social events. So yeah, being able to do fun stuff is not hard.
Do any of our students who are here, do you have any questions that you're wondering about?
If they're about navigating the metro system, I have answers aplenty.
That's very specific.
Do you have a preferred guidebook? Because I like, which one?
No. I used an app. It's called City Mapper. And that was especially great because when I arrived, the transport employees were all on strike, and the app told me which routes were open, like which one actually had service during these strike times. So that was extremely useful. However, like it's called RATP is the acronym for the service in Paris, and they have their own app which works similarly. So that's what I used as my navigator, and I would have been so freaking lost without it, because it is absolutely necessary. I don't even like, eventually you get to the point where like if you're going from one spot to another that you is part of your routine, you know like which stops and which lines to take. However, those apps are especially helpful to help you with timing because you need to know like when a train is coming and like uh, what your expected time of arrival will be. Those are especially useful.
It's so much easier these days. You have so many options. I noticed there's a question on the chat.
I can get that. So if there's a program that's not listed, will Kenyon possibly give credit, or is it a possibility? So yes, maybe. There is a much more extensive list of Kenyon approved programs that we would like you to look at as a starting point before we talk about additional options. And that is in our program database, which is called Studio Abroad. So that is kenyon.studioabroad.com. That program database has other programs that are in the Francophone world, but maybe may not be the ideal program for French majors for different reasons. For example, if they don't offer advanced French content courses, then we're probably not going to recommend it to this group of students, but they might be appropriate for other students. So that would be the starting point. If you're not finding what you're looking for there, meet with someone in our office and we can talk more about what we call the petition process, which would be to look at other options. We are willing to consider petitions as long as there's a program provider involved. We don't do direct exchange options where we would just directly send a student to a university without some sort of a support system or network in place. Those usually require you to sign some sort of a contractual agreement, which we can't really facilitate doing. So it sort of depends, but start with Studio Abroad. And if you're not seeing programs that fit the needs that you have, then meet with me or with my colleague Martin, and we can kind of help you figure out what the next steps would be
Another Prince asked a question. Were you intimidated by the way natives spoke? Did you feel confident in your ability to speak the language? Basically, how did you socialize? Okay, so I found that I did get, in the 2.5 months I was there, I did get notably more confident in how I would speak with natives. And I think that is largely in part thanks to the fact that I was with a host family. That being said, was I intimidated? Not really, because like I was confident enough in my ability to like string together coherent phrases to get my point across more or less. That being said, the thing with French people is they will notice that you are not a native speaker and they will call you out on it. One time I was at a coffee shop and I wanted them to heat up a piece of food because that was like how they operated. And I like asked the question, "Tu peux chauffer ce sandwich?" And he responded, "Yes." And I was like, "Oh, come on." Like, was it that obvious? That was what was going through my head? And like if I'm like at like a retail store and I like ask questions, they can also sort of pick up and talk to you in English, which got a little tired. However, like it does decrease as you practice more, especially like if you're using sort of routine phrases that you'd use in a commercial setting. Such as like, when I go into coffee shops after the first couple weeks, they didn't question where I was from or my accent. But like talking to like other students at the Sorbonne, we'd be chatting and they'd be like, "I noticed you speak with an accent. Where are you from?" So it's like they will notice that you are not a native speaker. However, depending on how confident you are with your French, you'll be fine.
Sometimes people are asking you that like out of genuine friendliness too, like, "Oh, where are you from?" Like, seems like you're not from around here. Like, tell me more about that. And sometimes they're switching just because it's like
Okay, Erica is asking about Emily in Paris. I'm going to refrain from asking that question because that show kind of makes me a little irritated. That being said, French people are not as mean as they do not, they're not as mean as that show depicts. I'll say that much.
Just like to comment quickly because I've seen the evolution. When I arrived in the US, it was quite a while ago, and I was teaching, and my students, they had that in mind. French people are mean. They will not speak English to you if you don't say a few words in French just because they expect you to speak some French, etc. That changed a lot, especially in Paris. And my students, they asked me, they went abroad. When they came back, they told me exactly the opposite. They told me, you know, people, when I started to speak, I made a few mistakes, and they started to speak English, even though their English sometimes was worse than the French the students were speaking. So it changed a lot. But also, Carter, I mean, your situation, you are in Paris. There are tons of tourists. It's a very cosmopolitan city too. It's not going to be the same if you go to a smaller town. It's not going to be the same if you go to a town where there are less tourists. Also, if you go to the southeast of France, if you go to Montpellier, Aix-en-Provence, there are tons of tourists all the time over there. Even though it's changing, obviously, now with the COVID, but still, so and it really depends. If you go to Bordeaux, it's going to be slightly different. There are tourists, but people are not that used to speak English. But still, they are not going to be
You're
mean to
probably going
you.
to hear more Spanish in Bordeaux because it's right there on the border.
I mean, to you, it seems to be on the border, Carter, but believe me, for the people living in Bordeaux, they are very far from Spain, in their mind at least. You know, distances are so different. I just wanted to do also a quick comment about non-French programs. Many of these programs, they are very similar in the way they work to the French programs in France also. I mean, the universities, for example, because many of these countries, as you know, they were former French colonies. So the system, the university system is most of the time very much the same. Many of these the professors teaching in these universities or programs, they've been trained in France also. So it's very it would be very similar. And if the program is smaller, you might have like smaller classes. It could be a slightly different, but usually it would be roughly the same. The only place where it's going to be close to the US is going to be Canada. But at the moment, we don't have many programs in Francophone Canada. I know there is a program in McGill, but which is a English-speaking university where you can take French courses, obviously, because it's in Montreal. But just so you know, we've been talking with my colleagues about maybe trying to see if there are like more programs in Canada as well, because we don't know what's going to happen, you know, with the context. So that could be a solution also, or easier if there were programs closer to us.
Do we have other questions? Carter, is it okay if people email you if they have questions?
Yes.
Or is there another way that you would share that's better?
Actually, yeah, I'll just go ahead and put my email address in the chat room. And yeah, and if anyone wants to ask me questions, I will do my best to answer them.
For those of you that are, anyone can do this actually, but the sophomores are like probably more at the point of looking at it, but there's in Studio Abroad, if you log into Studio Abroad, you'll see there's like a bunch of learning content. And one of those things is a list of all the people that were off campus last year. And so you have Carter's email on that, but you also have some other students who were on OCS programs last year that you can reach out to. A couple
When I
of
arrived,
programs, it's been a little
within
while.
48 hours, I was DMing people on social media who had been there for advice. So
Yeah.
yes, actually do take note of like the veterans.
It's a great resource.
Yes.
There's nothing like word of mouth.
The Kenyon network is is a very powerful thing. So this is kind of one of those opportunities where you get to use it to learn more and find out more and consider options. I know last week, Katie Connell, who's an alum of the Middlebury Cameroon program, was doing a talk on gender and politics and her kind of post Kenyon life in the few years since she graduated. And she was talking about her time working in Calais, which is a refugee camp in northern France. So, you know, that's someone who graduated and is still coming back and coming and talking to Kenyon, and was talking about her experience in Cameroon at that talk too. So definitely don't be afraid to reach out to people, because I think they're eager to share more of their experiences with you. So yeah. I'm going to stop recording, and if anyone has any kind of individual questions, I can hang out for a minute to accommodate those.